Welcome back to Hot Takes and Deep Dives, and The New Yorker has called my next guest the best cabaret artist of your generation. Out Magazine called you a tornado of art and activism. And, you know, you've also been mentioned more than any other person by other guests on this show. It's Justin Vivian Bond. Welcome.
Wow, that's very nice to hear. I hope they said good things.
Well, you have been mentioned. It's true. I was thinking about it, and you have been mentioned and referenced by, on this show, Sandra Bernhard, Isaac Mizrahi.
And they all said nice things?
I mean, these are obviously your contemporaries. But also, I also know Daniel Nardicchio very well. Mm-hmm. And a big part of his entry into New York was the fact that you two were roommates.
Yes, we were best friends in San Francisco. We've known each other for a very long time. He was actually one of my first friends when I moved to San Francisco. I worked at an art supply store with his roommate, and he came in to pick her up one day. And I was like, oh my God, I love this guy immediately.
And I know that if I'm remembering correctly from my chat with him, you lived together in Williamsburg?
Yes, in the mid-90s when there was like one Thai restaurant, one really rotten grocery store, and I think like there were like 3 places you could go then. And there was a cafe. It was like nothing. It was really beautiful though, because we lived right on the river. It was so nice.
Just when we hopped on, I was telling you how I've seen you perform quite a number of times, like over the years. And you're in the middle of a residency at Joe's Pub where you're doing a series of covers of Marianne Faithfull songs.
Yeah.
And
yes.
I don't know if you know this fun fact, but have you ever seen the show The L Word?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. The pilot episode of The L Word, like the show begins, a show which lasted 6 seasons, etc. The series opens with the Pleasure Song by Marianne Faithfull playing over a montage of the characters we are meeting for the first time.
Oh my God, I did not know that. That's the song I opened my show with. It's such a good song.
It's the best. That is my favorite Marianne Faithfull song. And like, I mean, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't because of like, that's what I associate it with.
Of course, she played God in Ab Fab twice. So yeah. She's got the creds. And also, you know, if you read her book, she's an appropriate starter for the L Word.
Do people in the audience, I mean, obviously they're there to see you, but what percentage of the audience do you think are into Marianne Faithfull?
Well, I think that my audience is, I'm very happy to say, I think trust my taste and what I'm going to present them with. But I do think that a lot of people that come are Marianne Faithfull fans. Mm-hmm. So I've sprinkled some of the songs that are the better known songs, but I really didn't do any of her early stuff. The earliest stuff is from the Broken English album. But what I really wanted to do was mostly things from the 90s and the 2000s up until now, because I just turned 60 in May, and I love doing pop songs. I like doing Taylor Swift songs, you know, and stuff like that for fun. But I wanted to do a show that was all written by a mature woman so that I could feel the words of a mature woman coming out of me. And they're not frivolous. They're great songs about real things that I experience. And so
aside from the Pleasure Song, which is, you know, I guess my personal favorite, I guess we'll just go on record and say that if somebody doesn't know where to start with Marianne Faithfull, give me top 2 songs that are easy to access.
Well, the most, you know, popular songs that I'm doing are Broken English, which is that's from the 1979 album. That was her kind of big breakthrough album after her early folk career that completely changed her iconography. But as far as like the more current things, I would say there's this great album called Before the Poison, which she co-wrote with PJ Harvey and with Nick Cave. So half is PJ Harvey and half is Nick Cave. And it's a really, really great album. And it has the infusion of their styles, but it's very full on Marianne. It's a gorgeous record.
I'm a huge PJ Harvey fan. She just played in Greenpoint last night at like at a venue. It was like a mix of like poetry and song and interview. And the room literally only holds like 100 people. And two of my good friends were able to get tickets. And so this morning I was getting a flurry of PJ Harvey videos and stuff from the minute I opened my eyes.
Yeah, she's incredible. I love her new record.
I mean, I know you grew up in Maryland and your first foray into, I guess, queer culture was moving to San Francisco, and then you eventually made it to New York. Like, what was the first time you ever got on stage? I presuming like that was in San Francisco.
Yeah. The first time I got on stage was when I was 18 months old in a church Christmas pageant. And I had a little speech as an 18-month-old that I gave to church. So I got on stage anytime I could from the time I was born.
So, okay, so let me make it more specific then. Tell me how you met your performing and writing partner, her. I mean, like, we should mention you're part of Kiki and Herb. You've been doing this forever. This like started in San Francisco and now you've been performing it in New York. How did you meet Kenny, who is Herb to your Kiki?
Well, I had this friend, this guy I kind of had a crush on. His name was Fred Miller. And he was friends with Kenny. And he asked me what I wanted to do. I told him I was a performer and that I wanted to have a lounge act. And he said, "Oh, my friend Kenny plays piano. You should meet him." I said, "Oh, introduce me." So he introduced me to Kenny at Cafe Fleur, which is where we all hung out back then. And I went over to Kenny's one day and I brought some of my music and, you know, music books. And we sang some Leonard Cohen and we sang a bunch of songs and realized that we had similar tastes and likes in music.
And like, I guess to summarize, like the bit is that you're playing like a failed alcoholic lounge.
Well, this is before Kiki. This was just me as myself. And then the first time we took the stage as Kiki and Herb was, I think, after Gay Pride in maybe 92. I was marching in the parade. I was emceeing a big show at the end of the parade. I sang at the end of the parade. But later that night, we had this show at this place called Cafe San Marcos. So I kind of lost my voice that day. So I said to Kenny, "I'm going to be Kiki tonight and you're going to be Herb." And then I sort of said, you know, we're lounge singers. We sat in the place and I put on the character, the costume, and I sang in this character's voice, which was not, you know, pleasant. And we did the material that we already had and we got a standing ovation. And I thought, well, if I don't have to sing good and I don't have to look good and I can get standing ovations from straight people, then I might as well just do that. And so it was less stressful for sure. I didn't have to worry about my appearance or how I sounded. So that's how it started.
To me, it's so funny that you have actually quit this act. You've quit Kiki and Herb a few times, but you keep getting seduced back into it because they'll put you up at Carnegie Hall. They'll give you all of these. I mean, you started doing these in like the basements of venues and like cut to you at Carnegie Hall. Like, take me through the process of you like literally wanting to quit this very in-demand act.
Well, it just took a lot of time, you know, it took a lot of time and energy. I like my career, but it was like sort of like the pig that ate the python. I mean, it was just this big thing that was consuming my life. And we did it from 1992 until my goal was to get Kiki and Herb off Broadway. And we played the Cherry Lane Theater in 2003. And we did 150 shows off Broadway. And I was exhausted. And I was like, well, that's it. I can go on and do other things now. And these producers invited us to lunch to talk about what we wanted to do next. And I didn't really want to do anything next. And as Kiki, and they said, "Well, what do you like?" I said, "No more runs. I like doing concerts, but I only want to do concert in fabulous theaters, and that's it." And he goes, "Where would you want to do it?" And I said, just because I didn't think that it would ever be possible, I said, "Oh, you know, Carnegie Hall." And they said, "Well, I think we can make that happen. And I almost still said no because I had decided I was going to go back to college and get my master's. I was in London with this person who I was fascinated by, put it that way. And I told them they wanted us to do Carnegie Hall, and I wasn't sure if I was going to do it because I was ready to move on. And he said, "Well, you have to do it. It's Carnegie Hall." And I said, "Well, if you promise to come, then I'll do it." And that's why I did Carnegie Hall, because I was in love with somebody and I wanted to impress them. Otherwise, I would just been like, who cares?
I want to talk about Joe's Pub because that's really the main venue that you perform pretty much year round. Like if you flip through the Joe's Pub calendar, I mean, every 6 months at least you're going to run in.
More than that.
Yeah, no, I'm saying like at least if you're just like playing around. Tell me why Joe's Pub is your home base for performing in New York.
Well, we started playing, we did Kiki and Herb at the Fez, which was this great underground venue. And then the same people that own the Fez opened Joe's Pub. And so I kind of decided that I would start working at Joe's Pub on my solo career, even while I was doing Kiki and Herb. And eventually we did end up doing a lot of shows at Joe's Pub as Kiki and Herb. And I think we played as Kiki and Herb at Joe's Pub the week that they opened, which was 25 years ago. But then it just became my performance home. It's where I've performed. And I mean, I'll do maybe 35 shows a year there. So I go every few months with a different show and a different set list, because as you may have guessed, I don't like doing the same thing over and over again for too long, which is why I did Kiki and Herb for a lot longer than I would have liked. But we changed that show up a lot. We had a huge repertoire because we come back with a new show every couple months, and it would be an entirely different show. At a certain point, I wasn't sure if I wanted to be an actor or if I wanted to really focus on music. And I realized that I just really prefer the company of musicians to actors. And so I thought, well, then I'll hang out with musicians because I just like the way they think and the way they work. And it's just a different process. And so I like my band, and I like that Joe's Pub is a place I can walk to. I walk to work, and I, have a wonderful relationship with everybody there. And so it's just a very special place to me.
You actually performed at Cowgirl, the Cowgirl Hall of Fame, on Hudson Street, the Mexican restaurant. Yes. Which in my mind is a gay restaurant. I know like back in the 90s, there were like more like gay restaurants, but now I guess that's not so much of a thing. But to me, in my mind, that is a gay restaurant. So
I never thought of it that way. So that's funny that you think that. I mean, I thought of it as a kind of a lesbianic restaurant.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Okay. But even then, like the person that ran it, the Cowgirl Hall of Fame, the people that worked there, the women who were really amazing women that just really looked after me, and they weren't lesbians, but just they loved the cowgirl. They liked, that energy. And I mean, they definitely liked lesbians, but they weren't lesbians. So I was like, oh yeah, it's just a sort of a fierce feminist place. But
isn't that so interesting that you thought the same thing?
Yes.
Anyway, the point is this.
And I love that I was playing there. It was wonderful. That's where we really got our start. $100 and a piece of fish. That's what we got paid every week.
So I had no idea. So I know that at Cowgirl, it's like upstairs and in toward the back, there is like a private room. Is that where the stage was?
Yes, it was set up differently then. The bar wasn't where it is. So yes, they had these like long tables they rammed that place full of as many seats as they could. And, we had people, because the one whole wall is just windows. So we had people just standing outside the windows watching the show. I don't even know if they could hear it, but people would just come, and if they couldn't get it in, they'd be like hanging through the doorway of the room. And it was crazy. That's why we had to eventually leave there, because it was just overrun. It was too much for them.
Who else have you seen perform at Cowgirl?
Nobody.
Oh.
I started there I started there. They wanted to have a thing on Thursday night. So I started there with Sherry Vine, who's this drag queen also from Maryland. And we did several weeks there. And we were doing this thing with Kiki and Sherry where we both kept showing up at the same auditions for the same parts in Broadway shows, none of which either of us would ever be cast in. And we would do our auditions and we would sing all these different songs. And it was so hokey, but it was really funny. But then she got some other thing on Thursday night and they said to me, well, would you like to take over and do something on Thursday nights? And I called Kenny, who was then in San Francisco. I was like, I got us this venue. Do you want to come and do it? And so he came and we started doing it every Thursday night. And that was how our careers took off really in New York.
You just mentioned the Wainwrights. Now, a fun fact about you is you officiated Rufus Wainwright's wedding.
Yes, I did.
How did that happen?
Rufus and his husband, now husband Jorn, invited me to lunch at this very fancy restaurant in Midtown. And I got there and they told me that they were engaged and they asked me if I would officiate their wedding. And I said, well, okay. And then Rufus's assistant worked me through all the paperwork to become a legal officiant in New York. And then I went out to their house in Montauk and presided over their nuptials.
Did you have to go to City Hall?
Yes, I'm registered in a big book at City Hall. I am a high priestess of the state of New York.
Because you can pick your title, right?
That's right.
Well,
So I chose high priestess, which I thought was the most accurate.
it's so interesting. You've been public for well over 20 years, very out as like a genderqueer trans person. So much in that time has changed in terms of understanding and visibility. What has that been like to discuss this with the media?
Well, I was very fortunate because in 1989, my friend Kate Bordenstein, who's a playwright and a performer, and she's a trans woman. She wrote the show called Hidden Agenda in San Francisco, and she asked me to be in it. And I was really, I almost didn't do it because I just felt like that was going to be something that I kind of had as a secret that I wasn't ready to deal with. And I had this roommate, this guy, this like cis straight guy who I had read the script, and he was like, "It's a great script. You have to do it." And so I was cast as Herculine Barbin, whose journals were discovered by Michel Foucault, and I was this 19th century French intersex character. And it was a very funny show, but my character was much more serious and more poignant and kind of heartbreaking. But we did it at the Theater Rhinoceros in San Francisco, which was an LGBTQ theater. And then we did a little out of town show, and it was in this little teeny tiny town up near the California border near Oregon. And we went to the bar across the street after the show. And of course, everybody who had been in the audience was there, and they just had all these questions. So we thought, okay, well, they all were so enthusiastic and positive and open-minded about what the show was about. So we started doing Q&As after every show. And by talking with Kate and having her example, and by being able to feel comfortable and honest with these large audiences. And then we toured the country, and we did that everywhere we went. So I just became really used to it and really comfortable, and actually really proud of being somebody who could open people's eyes and open people's hearts and open people's minds to what it was and what we were. And at that point, I knew I was transgender, but the only way anyone else really knew is for me to tell them, and for me to be out about it, because I didn't feel the need to have any sort of surgical intervention, because I thought I looked, great. And, and so I had to deal with misogyny, I had to deal with transphobia, and I had to deal with homophobia, all of it. But I just thought that I was, so great that I mean, for I felt good about myself so that it didn't really bother me, and I just didn't put myself into situations that I found to be demeaning, which is why I didn't really do a lot of. I didn't have the courage that a lot of trans women had to work in the television and film industry, because the things that they had to put up with were just things that I couldn't have. I just wouldn't. I didn't have the drive, and I certainly didn't have the internal strength for that.
I've interviewed Candace Kane in the past, and Candace has talked about how she was a lead on Dirty Sexy Money, which was an ABC show.
She's one of the people I'm thinking about. Yeah.
She's one of the people you're thinking about?
Yes, of course. She was such a trailblazer, but she had to do all these roles. Like, she's supposed to be a dead person. And, if you watch Disclosure, you can see, but she really, and she is a woman. I don't claim to be a woman. I'm a trans person. I don't want to be anything other than who and what I am. I don't feel like there's a misconception about who and what I am, for the most part. And when you're assigned a gender that you are not, which she was, and she's a woman, so for her to be going out for these roles took such strength, because she's a woman that was being asked to play a trans woman all the time. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I would imagine that would be really frustrating.
I'm actually going to tie this back to Daniel Nardicchio. Daniel produced a concert between you and Carol Channing on Fire Island. I'm bringing this up because, and then of course later you did in New York City, but it was initially so successful. You did it in Cherry Grove at the Ice Palace, which Daniel now has taken the reins over. And right. I'm very connected to Fire Island. So I guess there are a couple questions here. I want to know, was that your first time on Fire Island, that Carol Channing experience? And what did you, okay, tell me your Fire Island experience.
Well, my friend Danny Fields, I became friends with Danny, who was the A&R guy at Elektra, who signed Iggy and the Stooges. He worked with, all these amazing people. And he was heavily quoted in Please Kill Me, The History of Punk in New York. And so I was doing Kiki and Herb at that time, Flamingo East. And my friend Ian introduced me to this guy, Danny. And then for some reason I said, "Are you Danny Fields?" And he said, "Yes." And I was like, oh my God, I worshiped him. I just thought he was like the height of cool and the people that he had known and worked with. And so we became friends, and he had a house on Fire Island. I think this is probably like 99 or something like that. And he invited me and my then partner, Sammy Joe, out to his house on Fire Island, and I had a great time. We just had such a wonderful
Cherry Grove or the Pines?
It was Cherry Grove, yeah, it was Cherry Grove, and so I was and still am partial to Cherry Grove as far as Fire Island experiences go. I like the Pines, but I love Cherry Grove. So that was great. I just loved it. I had the most wonderful time. And then the next time I went out, Kenny and I were on the cover of HX, and the day after I arrived, there was an HX with our pictures on the cover on everyone's front doorstep in all of, Cherry Grove and the Pines. And then it was a nightmare. I hated it because it was just like, I didn't want to. I worked in nightclubs and I would get paid to talk to drunks, but I didn't really like talking to drunks that I didn't know when I wasn't being paid. So it changed everything.
So what led up to this Carol Channing performance at the Ice Palace?
Well, Daniel had done a thing with Alan Cumming and Liza, and it was a big success, and everybody loved it. And we were just hanging out at his place on Fire Island, and he said that he wanted to do something like that again. And if I could do it with anybody, who would I want to do it with? And I said Carol Channing.
Why Carol?
Well, I just always loved Carol Channing. I found her to be so fascinating and so funny, and I just loved her. I thought it would be a really fun thing to do. I think she was an underrated artist, even though everybody knows who she was, because she was so funny and so eccentric, I think people undervalued how brilliant she was. And so that was part of, I mean, I did a lot of research
Mm-hmm.
to do that show, to find, she was a woman that majored in theater in the 40s, and that at a college at Binghamton. She just was a very well educated, very intelligent woman who found this sort of character that she played for the rest of her life.
So I know you're probably thinking, where did this, like you were talking about the fact that you see yourself as transgender and somebody like Candace is a woman. The reason my mind went to all the Fire Island stuff, this is about to make sense for people listening. So I did a whole series, like an oral history of Fire Island, a different podcast series. And in the process, I became close with a trans woman, Parker Sargent, and she created a trans celebration weekend this past September. And the island was flooded with trans and non-binary folks. It was the first time anything like this had ever taken place, an actual weekend dedicated to this. Mm-hmm. And I forget what the context was, but Parker was saying that for her, she never wants to lose her trans identity. And so that I really understand what you're saying, how you see yourself as trans, not a woman. You go by MX, Mix, Justin Vivian Bond, and I fully understand what you're saying by that. And that's where the whole Fire Island Dan Leonardo thing came from. But
also, if I have to be herded into a group, I'm definitely going with the women. That's where I feel at home. But I also don't believe anybody's not transgender, quite frankly.
Wait, so, tell me more.
I just don't think anybody is not transgender, because what we're supposed to be and what we're supposed to do with our lives, that if it's based on just like what your genitalia, and that's what basically gender essentialists are. Like, you can't be a woman because you were assigned male at birth, because blah, blah, and like you have to be one thing or the other. And if you are one thing or the other, then what? You're supposed to act in a certain way as one thing and in a certain way as the other. And if you cross a line, then, you become persecuted. Yes, that's what happens in many cultures. But who decides that and who enforces it? A bunch of assholes. Not intelligent, caring, sensitive, loving people. So anybody who is not one of those things is transgender, as far as I'm concerned. You get to be yourself,
Well, everybody has masculine and feminine energy within them.
I guess that's it. I know who I am. I don't need to compare myself to men. I don't need to compare myself to women. I just don't want to have to be bothered by that stuff, because I know who I am. And when people are bothered by that, then that's their problem. But I just feel like if everybody was just who they are, you get to be all kinds of things.
How were you so comfortable back in San Francisco being so openly genderqueer? Was there any other visibility or representation that you saw that you felt like, oh, like I can be like this person?
Not really. I didn't want to be like any people, but I wanted to dress like Elizabeth Montgomery and be wit. But no, I didn't even like men at all. I wasn't really friends with any. With a rare few, until I moved to San Francisco and I discovered like queens and queers and those kinds of men who weren't like straight men, or that just were like people I could relate to and feel comfortable around. I never really felt comfortable around even other gay men, really, when I was young. And here was a revelation for me, because one of the people I always really admired was Vanessa Redgrave. Take her, and other people too, but she was a great actress as far as I was concerned, and I liked her, and I thought, well, I couldn't really emulate her. I was never going to be like her. But then I realized that what I liked so much about her was that she was so uniquely herself, and she was opinionated, and she stood up for what she believed in. And I realized the only way I can be like her is to be as much like myself as possible, to find out who that is, to find out what that is, and to live that way. And that's how I emulate the people that I admire, because they are fully themselves.
Is it true that back in San Francisco, you judged the very first drag king contest?
I think I don't know if I judged or if I hosted, but I was
You were
definitely,
there, is the point.
yes, I was a central figure of the evening.
Talk to me about, I feel like drag kings are so underrepresented and like people don't even talk. Some people are like, what even is that? Can you talk
Mhm.
about that? And like, what was that scene like? What was the year and what was the vibe like? And what were the kings like?
Well, they were wonderful, first of all. But I went to this piano bar and I met these other queer people at this piano bar. And one of them was Lee Crow, who at that time performed as Elvis herselvis. And that was her drag king name.
Uh-huh.
And I saw this simpatico, like her gender expression was like coming from the opposite way of my gender expression was. And she was so charming and so flirtatious and made me feel so beautiful. And I just loved being around. And she still identifies as she. But then there were other people there was this person, Stafford, who was very androgynous, very beautiful, but very masculine and would wear suits. And again, was so charming and such a gentleman and made me feel a way that no man had ever made me feel before. And so the drag kings in San Francisco were really sexy and charming, and they were multidimensional. Many of them went on to transition.
Mm.
But at the time, it was drag king and it was performative. It was like, trying to be like drag queens
Mhm.
but only men, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
But a lot more subtle. And then when I came to New York, the drag kings here were so kind of clownish, like cartoonish, that they were playing these like horrible, they were imitating men, but they were no men I would want to know. You know what I mean? And so I really didn't hang out with the drag king scene in New York too much because it was too, I mean, it was maybe reflective of what kind of misogynist nonsense you had to deal with in New York, as opposed to, the more queer friendly, less misogynist culture in San Francisco.
Isn't it wild how Murray Hill, who is another like downtown Joe's Pub cabaret legend, I
But
just very,
charming.
very charming and like tongue in cheek.
Mhm.
Murray has been around forever. And it's funny, a few weeks ago, I binged the 2 seasons of Bridget Everett's show that Murray is on called Somebody Somewhere. It's on HBO.
Yes.
Isn't it wild that Murray Hill is a series regular on an HBO show? Basically playing himself.
Uh-huh. Well, I mean, it's about time, isn't it?
I just think that's remarkable.
I mean, yes, it is remarkable, but it shouldn't be. Murray Hill's an amazing performer, amazingly talented, has all the skills, can be vulnerable, and is somebody who's worked and been in this business and been charming audiences for 20, 30 years. I don't know how long. But why wouldn't they be on that show? They have more experience and more ability than most people on TV.
When you came to New York, and okay, I guess Daniel was your first roommate, who were your friends? Like, who were the other up and coming cabaret performers that you got to know?
Well, my group of friends, well, first of all, people that I admired were a little bit older than me, but I really admired John Kelly, who is a performance artist, but who I'd seen in San Francisco and sort of opened my mind as to what possibilities there were. But when I moved to New York, I kind of laid low for the first 6 months, and I kind of went around to see what scene I wanted to insert myself into. And I found Squeezebox, which was this weekly party where they had drag queens singing rock and roll with a live band. And I really thought, well, I have to be performing with these people because I want to sing with the band. And so I started to develop an audience there. And then Sherry Vine came to see an even pre-Cowgirl show of Kiki and Herb. And she invited me to be in this place she did at PS 122, which is also where we had done Hidden Agenda when we came to New York. So that's sort of like East Village, queer drag punk scene that was in the 90s. That's where I met my sort of family. And that's how I started to develop my audience. And then Mario Diaz started to do parties, and he had me host at this party on Avenue B. And then he opened the Cock, and I was the hostess of the Foxy party at the Cock. And again, that's how I was there every week. And that's how I developed audiences that would come and support me and my shows and the Kiki and Herb shows. And so just from, the neighborhood queers and freaks.
And
It wasn't like I had a lot of celebrity friends that I knew Jonathan Larson because we went to college together, and he was writing Rent. And so that premiered in, I think, 96, fall of 96.
It opened on Broadway in 96, but the workshop was maybe a year or two earlier.
I think it was February of 96. It could have been 95, but anyway, the night he died, I was there at the show.
You went to college with Jonathan Larson.
Yeah, he was 2 years ahead of me.
When he was working on Rent, how did he describe it?
Well, he basically said it was about a bunch of, downtown people. And I knew there was a drag queen character. And I didn't really pay that much attention, to be perfectly honest. We went to cocktail parties at my friend's house every week, and we hung out with each other. But I didn't really know. I had worked with him in college. He did cabaret shows, and that's how I but one time he said to me, we were rehearsing, and he goes, "Can you sing the notes?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, can you sing this song as written?" I go, "Oh, you want me to sing every note on key and just write?" He said, "Yeah, can you do that?" And I said, "Yes, I can." So I had this song, and I sang it all perfectly on pitch and sang all the notes, quarter notes, half notes, eighth notes. And when I was done, I said, "Now, how was that?" He said, "That was great." And I go, "Well, I hope you enjoyed it, because you're never going to hear it again." Because that wasn't my style. And so I sort of tortured him, but I liked him a lot.
You mentioned Vanessa Redgrave, and I know your other kind of dream mother. You've referenced Christine Baranski as being another sort of kindred dream mother for you.
She was my mother in some of my dreams. So I call her my mother, Christine Baranski, even though I've never met her. I sat behind her on a flight one time from LA, and she had her two daughters with her. And she was so lovely with her daughters, and they were all so gorgeous. And they sat in front of me, and I was like, oh, what a nice, I was touched by the way they related to each other and how sweet they all were. That's really all I know about her.
Did you create the MX sort of?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Other people may have said it first, but I did this blog post in maybe 2011 or something. And I was sort of coming out, and I was changing my name to Vivian because I was just so tired of being referred to as he in the press. And I don't know if I had or was about to put out my first my only memoir, but I chose Mix because I wanted something that was literally not like Ms., not Miss, not Mr. or Mrs., but Mix, which literally says what you are, a mix of genders. And that way nobody would have to be confused. And trans women or women identified women could still be Miss or Mrs., but I wanted to be mixed. And at the time, it was kind of a stupid mistake because I said I wanted my pronoun to be V, but I had also chosen the name Vivian. And so I think people thought the V was because of Vivian. And the reason I wanted V, because I thought V would be better than they, them, because it's two equal size lines that meet in the middle that I thought would be a great thing to say I'm transgender. So it could be V's. Anyway, but that didn't take off, but Mix did.
During that process where you were sort of like telling the public, reintroducing yourself as Justin Vivian Bond, when critics would write about you, or even just journalists would write about you, was there ever any jarring experiences? Like if you went and read those pieces, if they would either not understand it, what somebody
No,
thinks.
I had to really fight. And when I put my book out through Feminist Press, Elizabeth Koch was the publicist and promoter. I'm not promoter, but the publicist, and she really helped market my book. And so I had an ally finally. And so instead of me getting upset because the New York Times misgendered the headline of my trans narrative autobiography, calling me a boy, and the headline was about being trans, I didn't have to call and yell at them. She did. But then what happened was you had the internet. Whereas before you had no recourse. You could write a letter to the editor. Maybe they would respond. Maybe they would pay any attention, or most likely they would completely ignore it. But now you could call out people for being transphobes. You could call out people for being homophobe. You could publicly shame them and make them look like the stupid idiots that they were. And so then they started to take a pause before they decided to just wag their cisgendered male cock in your face by saying, I'm the one with the power here. And so they discovered that the power was a power share. And so it became much better. And, but it was still a battle, but I became hardened seeing all that. But then eventually, they would say, oh, I'm sorry, I couldn't do anything about that. The style Bible at the Times insists that we have to call you Mr. And I was like, well, you better fucking change that style Bible. And eventually they did. And now there's a little bit of a backlash, but the transphobia and the homophobia in the New York Times, is called being fair now, but quote unquote, but it's come a long way. And I, not to brag, but I feel like I did have a lot to do with that.
Of course.
I was on the battle constantly with those people.
You're very open about your age. I think, you're in your early 60s, or maybe you're 60.
No, I just turned 60. I'm not my early 60s. Let's not push it. I'm honest about it, but I'm not, exaggerating.
Listen, you look fabulous. The point is this. The point is this. There are not a lot, you've said that there are not a lot of trans women your age.
Or gay men. Yeah, because of AIDS.
Because they lost that generation.
The whole generation ahead of me, it's pretty much, there are older gay men, but there aren't that many. Not as many as there should have been. And certainly trans women, who were survival sex workers and all that, there are a lot of my girlfriends are no longer here from when I was young. So that's just a fact. But I like young people, so I'm not too depressed about it. I just, I still have friends that are alive.
I know that you have a home upstate in the Hudson Valley. Tell me why, when you were trying to figure out where you wanted to buy your home, what was it about I go upstate. I have friends who live in Beacon and Hudson, and, I love going up there during the fall and the spring. Tell me what you love about the Hudson Valley.
Well, I had been curating and hosting the Spiegel Tent as part of the Summerscape at Bard College for 3 or 4 years. And so I was up there every summer with my cat Pearl, who was alive at that point. And they would rent us a house, and we'd spend the summer up there. And then, the end of August, we'd come back to the city, and I could tell Pearl didn't like it. And I certainly was sad to have to give up that spot, that place in the country and the beauty of it, and move back into a little tiny apartment in the city. Not that I don't love the city, but now that I have a house upstate, my apartment's less, constricting to me. But yeah, by then I had a community from working there every summer. I knew a lot of people, and I thought it was beautiful, and I wasn't moving to some town where I didn't know anybody. And it just seemed like a natural move.
It's interesting how Beacon, I think, has a real gay presence, but Hudson specifically, the town of Hudson, is very gay.
It's very gay and definitely very, very gay friendly. And I mean, I think there's a really big gay community in Kingston too.
Yes.
Hudson it's a town that some days you just don't see a lot of people on the street. And then some days there's, a million people in the streets. It's super crowded. So it's, it's a very transient area where gays come in waves and then they leave in waves, and the artists come in waves and then they leave in waves, and in each of those waves a lot of really fabulous people stay, so it's kind of really built up to be this wonderful community up there.
I actually saw Coco Peru perform in Kingston last year.
I was at that show.
Really?
Yes, we went to college together, Coco Peru and I.
You went to college with Jonathan Larson and Coco Peru?
He was 2 years ahead of me and she was a year behind me, but we were all in the same theater department and we did shows together.
Are
yeah.
you
Isn't that crazy?
Are you that is crazy. Are you part of the Big Gay Hudson Valley Facebook group?
I don't know.
You don't know.
I worked with those guys.
Yeah. They're fabulous.
They presented me when I was the queen of the carnival in Provincetown 2 summers ago. Those guys are really great. I love them. And they produced me in a show at Town Hall in Provincetown that was just so much fun. And I got to be, in a big float in the parade. It was great. And it was right after the Roe v. Wade was.
Oh, yes.
So I had a microphone on that parade and I was just reading the Supreme Court and telling everybody abortions for everyone. We're going to have them as soon as the parade's over, just for political purposes. Political abortions.
Describe Carnival in Provincetown for anybody who doesn't know what we're talking about.
Well, I don't really know. I was the queen of Provincetown's Carnival. So no, it's a big party. It's just a great big party, and they have a parade and wonderful shows, and it's just a theme where everybody does, costumes and masks.
It's their Mardi Gras.
It's their Mardi Gras, yes. As one of their weeks. There's Bear Week, which is also really fun. And there's, Family Week, which I avoid. And, Girl Week. And there's like a kind of a circuit party week.
Yeah, that's July 4th. I'll tell you, I recently returned home from Spooky Bear, which is their Halloween weekend.
Ooh, I was up there for Halloween once.
Oh, so did you do Spooky Bear?
I had a big fight with my boyfriend that weekend, so I don't really remember anything but sadness.
Well, that's too bad. But you should go back. Go back now that you're single. You will. It was the greatest. Everyone takes the costumes very seriously.
The weather's perfect. It's kind of spooky. It's really in that regard, it's fabulous.
This has been so much fun. Justin Vivian Bond. You're fabulous. Tell everybody. I mean, you're currently finishing this run of shows at Joe's Pub, and then you're going to be at Town Hall with Kiki and Herb.
And then I'm going back to Joe's Pub with my Christmas show, Icing, which will be my holiday solstice show, the 19th, 20th, and 21st of December, and then the first Thursday, Friday, and Saturday in January after New Year's.
Amazing. And what will the theme? Will that just be Christmas?
Well, it'll be wintry because it's called Icing, you see. It's to celebrate the winter solstice and the holidays, but it's going to be a kind of a icy, wintry themed show. And it's going to be a bunch of new songs that have to do with winter and snow and ice.
Check out Amy Mann's Christmas album. It may speak to you.
Great. I love her.
Yeah. This was great. This was great.
Thank you. I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
See you soon, I hope.